When Hitler and company murdered Jews, college students were not protesting in support of Hitler's genocidal regime and for no war against Germany. Young people were lining up instead to enlist in the fight against Hitler. Murder to them was murder, always wrong and never defensible, no matter how much Hitler or anyone else tried to dress it up. If Hitler tried the same genocide in today's times, all he would have to do is call his genocidal campaign resistance. In today's times, murdering, raping, and kidnapping have become acceptable, even defended by millions of people, maybe even billions. All that has to be done is to use the words not indigenous, colonialist, apartheid, occupiers, resistance, settlers, and so forth, and millions line up like lemmings in blind support for murder. Many of the lemmings, the sheep, will not outright say they support murder. Instead, they will say that they oppose colonialism and all of the other in-style buzzwords that they think justifies murder. Slavery, conquest, occupation, colonialism, imperialism have a long and dark history independent of anything having to do with Europe. Europe has its own dark history in this regard. Conquerors, enslavers, occupiers, colonialists, imperialists, settlers from the Middle East, from Turkey, from Asia, from Africa, and from lands outside of Europe have enslaved and murdered hundreds of millions of people. The prohibition against murder gets dismissed when it comes to Israel. Instead, it turns into an endless debate regarding who is indigenous, who are settlers, who are colonizers, who are occupiers, as though proving the Israelis to be or not to be any of these things gives their enemies the right to murder. The majority population of Israel, Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, including not only British and before that Turkish-controlled Palestine, but also Jews from Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Algeria, Libya, Yemen, and more, have their own history of persecution, expulsion, massacres, occupations, and pogroms. The fact that most Israeli Jews are indigenous people to the Middle East gets ignored or dismissed in the eagerness to label Israelis as colonizers and non-indigenous, and to use that and more words as the excuse to murder. Indigenous or not, colonizers or not, nothing justifies murder. Deliberately harming and murdering civilians is always wrong, without exception. Millions of people, even billions, live on lands stolen from indigenous people, lands that were colonized, occupied, often by brutal conquest. Countless millions call for the murder of Israelis for allegedly being occupiers, non-indigenous, or colonizers, while they themselves live on lands in countries all over the Middle East, North Africa, Asia, North America, South America, Australia, and elsewhere that were stolen from indigenous people by conquest, colonization, imperialism, and enslavement. Hypocrisy comes to mind. The defense of murder itself. People that are the target of murder have the right to defend themselves, which often means there will be war against those that seek murder. War and murder are not the same. Casualties of war is not murder. People that are the target of murder, that do not have the means of defending themselves, often become the true victims of genocide. Casualties of war and genocide are not the same. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others from Gaza raped, kidnapped, and murdered defenseless people on October 7th, starting a war. Hamas uses the civilians of Gaza as their human shields to hide beneath and behind. The well-fed, well-armed soldiers and commanders of Hamas and Islamic Jihad on October 7th committed their massacres, their atrocities inside of Israel against defenseless people, defenseless populations from babies to the very old. There would not be war now if not for that day of infamy. No one has the right to murder. If this is, then there's no exceptions to that, period. If this is too hard to understand and to defy, then there is no hope left for humanity.